Gmedit comes with some great utilities for manipulating geometry. One tool is called CSG Subtract, and it is basically a carving utility. But before I show you how to use it, I'm going to show you why it's so useful. Let's say I wanted to create a hole in this large object here using the same dimensions as this smaller object here. As you'll see in my orthogonal view, I've set this up so that this smaller object basically represents where the hole would be. Well, if I do that without using a CSG Subtract, one way to do it would be to basically create a series of smaller brushes and that leave a gap or a hole in between them. So, for example, I can resize this brush, and then I can clone whatever my selected brush is by pressing spacebar. And you'll see that the editor has deselected what I cloned from, and it has selected the cloned object and offset it by one grid unit. Now, if I left-click and drag, clone again by pressing spacebar, left-click and drag, clone again, and move. And if I get this guy out of the way and move my camera a little bit, we can see that I have created a hole here in my object. But that was fairly time-consuming, and it probably isn't the best way and it definitely isn't the best way when you have a great tool like CSG Subtract at your disposal. So let me undo until we get back to our solid shape here. Alright. Now, to use CSG Subtract, you basically use you create a carving brush and or what some people call a subtraction brush, and you set up the brush so that it passes through the object that you want to carve out. And basically any volume that your subtraction brush intersects with your target brush, that volume will be removed. And so if I check my orthogonal views, you'll see that the brush does indeed pass through my target object. And so I'm going to go ahead and click on CSG Subtract, which is this button up here. And if I switch views and I move my subtraction object out of the way, you'll see that the editor has created separate brushes and left me with a square-shaped hole that corresponds to the dimensions of the object I used for the subtraction. Another tool is called CSG Merge, and it allows you to take two separate brushes and merge them into one object again. So, if I alter this slightly, I'm going to delete this brush by pressing the backspace key. The backspace will delete any selected brush. And I'm going to delete this one as well. And I'm going to basically now I have three objects stacked together. Now the caveat of CSG Merge is that the face in between the two brushes has to have the same dimensions. So I'm checking in my orthogonal views, and I can see that the face in between these two objects does indeed have the same dimensions. So now I can click on CSG Merge, which is this button up here, and you'll see that the line between them is now gone, and I can move it around as if it was one object. And so I can do it again with these two objects, CSG Merge, and now I'm back to one large object. Another utility that comes with the map editor is called the Clipper, which can be accessed via this button here, or also in the menu under Selection. And you can see the keyboard shortcuts for various Clipper options are also in the menu in case you need to look them up. So I'm going to press X to enable the Clipper. And to use it, you have to place at least 2 clip points. So if I left-click once, you'll see a blue dot appear. But nothing has really happened. In order to get the clipper to function properly, I have to place another clip point. And when I do, you'll see that my cube-shaped object is now looking more like a wedge. And I can adjust the slope of the clip. If I move my mouse over any of the blue dots, you'll see that the pointer turns into a crosshair. I can left click and drag. And as you can see in both the 3D and orthogonal views, that I can adjust the slope of the clip. Now, and that works for any one of these. Now notice that I can also move the clip point outside or even within the dimensions of the object itself, and the clip will always happen along a straight plane. So, like, imagine a plane slicing through this object. Your clip points just basically define the angle of that plane. So let's say I'm happy with this particular clip setting, and I want to keep this new shape. Well, whatever is highlighted in yellow is what you will what you'll have when you press Enter to finalize the clip. So if I do that, I now have this this half of the wedge shape. Now, if I undo to get back our original object, I'll show you. You can toggle between which side you want to keep. So, like, let's say instead of this side, I wanted to keep the other half. I can toggle between them by pressing Control Enter, and you'll notice that the clip has not finalized yet, but I'm now the other half is now selected. So you can flip between the two by pressing Control Enter. And so if I wanted to keep this half, I can press Enter, and now I'm left with just this half. I'm going to undo again. Now, let's say I perform a clip. Now, notice that even when you undo, you're still in clipping mode. So, oftentimes, when you're done using the clipper, you are going to need to toggle out of clipping mode. So let me create another clip, and you'll see that, again, this half is highlighted. Well, let's say I want to keep both halves. If I want to do that, I can press Shift and Enter, and you'll see that I now have both halves. If I deselect, I can move them around as separate objects. They are indeed separate objects. So let me undo one more time, and we'll get back to our original object. Now, the clipper is great because you can also clip in 3 dimensions. To do so, you enable clipper, and you place 2 clip points like normal, and then you switch to another view, and you place a 3rd clip point. And as you can see, it might be kind of difficult to see the changes here in the orthogonal view until you get used to it. But if you look here in the 3D view, we definitely have a 3-dimensional, like the plane has been oriented in 3 dimensions. And so you can move around the points to kind of fine-tune your particular slice, as you can see here. And so that's how you use the clipper. Now, if you want to deselect an object after you've used the clipper or while you're using it, if you press Escape, you will actually toggle out of clipping mode and you will not deselect the object. In order to do that, you have to press Escape twice, and then you will be able to completely deselect an object. Now, I've been trying to remember to mention the keyboard shortcuts as I use them, but in case you ever forget them, you can always look in the menu, and you'll see that, say, for example, the clipper, you can see all the options there for dragging edges, vertices, and so on and so forth, grid size. So basically, the menu usually has the keyboard shortcut for that function. You can also look up every single command that is possible in the editor under the Help menu, and then Command List. And you'll see that all the commands are listed along with their keyboard shortcuts. That can be very useful whenever you forget a keyboard shortcut. Okay, now I've set up this sort of odd arrangement of brushes and give them very funky textures, but basically just so you can tell them all apart. What I want to cover here are selections, ways to select multiple brushes very quickly. The first of the tools I want to show you is called Select Partial Tall. Now, Select Partial Tall works best in the XZ front or the YZ side views. to use Select Partial Tall, you drag out a brush that will work as your selection brush. And as you'll see, pretty much anything that is that the selection brush passes through using Select Partial Tall will be selected. So when I click Select Partial Tall, you'll see that this brush, and the two here on the sides were selected, but the very top and bottom brushes in this stack were not. So that's Select Partial Tall. Another selection tool is called Select Complete Tall. And I'm going to show you the difference between that and Select Partial Tall. I've just dragged out a selection brush here outlined in red, and with Select Partial Tall, if I were to use it, it would select the sides and then these three here in the stack, and that was because that selection brush passed through all of these brushes. Now, if I deselect everything, and I'm going to create another selection brush with roughly the same dimensions. Now, instead of using Select Partial Tall, I'm going to use Select Complete Tall, which is this one here. And you'll notice that I've only selected this one brush that's in the middle of this stack. And the reasoning behind that is Select Complete Tall basically selects everything within the height of your selection brush, but it only selects brushes that are completely within the height of your selection brush. Another selection tool is called Select Inside, and the way it works is it will select any brush that is completely inside the borders of the selection brush. So, for example, if I were to use it now, we would expect only these top two objects to become selected, because all the others, like this here on the side and this one here, are not completely within the selection brush. So if I choose Select Inside, we get what we expect. Only these top two brushes are selected. Now, the last selection tool is called Select Touching, and it's pretty self-explanatory. Like, let's say, for example, I select this brush here in the center. Now, if I click on Select Touching, it will select the brushes, any brushes that come into contact with it. Now, one thing about Select Touching is that it does not work for multiple objects. So, for example, if I select this, and then I choose Select Touching, nothing happens. It only works with a single brush. So, again, another example, Select Touching selects everything that touches that single brush.